Like a backstage pass to the world of fly fishing travel, this is Waypoints, the podcast of destination angling. News and events, helpful travel tips, destination profiles, great stories, and expert advice from some of the most seasoned and experienced names in fishing travel. Waypoints is presented by Yellow Dog Fly Fishing, the industry's #1 specialty travel company and the fly shop for the world of fly fishing. Freshwater or saltwater, international or domestic, Yellow Dog has you covered for your next fishing adventure. And now your host, author, photographer, and world traveler, Jim Klug.
Welcome to Waypoints, where today we're having a unique and informative conversation about the legends of fly fishing, angling pioneers who helped create, shape, and further our sport. So a few weeks back, anglers Bryan O'Keefe and BRYAN GREGSON, along with myself, were all down in Denver for the Fly Fishing Consumer Show. We were also hanging with a group of younger guys from the Yellow Dog team, all staying together at an Airbnb close to the show venue. One night after the show, while we were all sitting around drinking beer and BSing, we started talking about some of the true icons of the sport, the original OG influencers in fly fishing. The two Bryans and myself, who were pretty much the older guys in the room, listed off dozens of names of key pioneers and players who helped shape and further our sport, almost all of whom made their contribution in the 20th century between the 1940s and, say, the 1990s. Now, these younger guys we were with were all industry professionals who have chosen fly fishing as their career. They're great at their jobs, exceptional anglers, experienced in their roles, and they've traveled to more places around the world at a young age than most people will in a lifetime. They are super legit at what they do, and they truly know the sport of fly fishing. The one thing they all had in common, however, is they were all pretty much under the age of, say, 40. So O'Keefe, Gregson, and I started rattling off some of the names of the most influential contributors to the sport of fly fishing, some of the all-time greats. And we were honestly shocked that this group of younger guys, super savvy with most things having to do with fly fishing, knew so few of the names. Which made us realize that if this crew of avid, experienced anglers knew so little about the pioneers of the sport, then chances were good that there were at least 2 or 3 generations of anglers out there that were in the same boat. Fly fishermen in serious need of a history lesson on the people who made this sport what it is today. So, based on that big night of conversation in Denver, we came up with the idea of recreating the exercise and the list for a podcast episode titled 30 Names Every Angler Should Know, the Legend Who Helped Shape Fly Fishing. This is a list that includes historical figures, innovators, writers, adventurers, and modern conservationists who, through their actions, teachings, and contributions, have left a lasting impact on our sport. So we're going to list off what we consider to be 30 important, influential, and pioneering names. But first, I want to explain a few things about how our selection process worked. First off, we decided to focus on key players from the 20th century, really that time frame of, say, the 1940s through the 90s. That means that legendary names like Isaac Walton, Charles Cotton, Charles Orvis, and Dame Juliana Berners were not included in this conversation, as their time was well before the window we're focusing on. Yes, they were pioneers, and of course they contributed greatly to the sport, but we're going to focus on primarily names from the 20th century. Secondly, modern pioneers and industry leaders are not going to be included. So before people email in telling us how we've messed up by not including the likes of Kelly Gallup, Jeff Currier, April Vokey, Jaco Lucas, or Bryan O'Keefe for that matter, we get it. Again, we're focusing on an earlier period in the history and evolution of fly fishing. Third, you need to understand that this is not a ranked list, nor is it a complete list. The names we've compiled are in no particular order of importance or significance, and we're not trying to rank anyone based on their individual status or their contributions. Rather, they have all made this list because they are legitimate, accomplished anglers, writers, conservationists, and innovators that we believe have had a massive influence on the sport. It is hard to narrow a list down to only 30 names, and we very well could have come up with, say, a top 100 list. But for the sake of keeping this manageable, we decided to stick with 30 names. And finally, this is a list that we've put together for fun, based on names that we've grown up with that we believe have shaped fly fishing. It is by no means a complete list, and I will apologize preemptively if we've omitted any important names or accomplishments. This may also just be the first 30, which we could easily follow up with, say, the next 30 names on a future episode. Who knows? But anyway, we've had a lot of fun putting this together. We think you're going to enjoy this, and we will be right back after a word from our sponsors. Waypoints is sponsored by Patagonia. To bring their gear to life, Patagonia is motivated by relentless curiosity and a passion for the wild. They evaluate hundreds of materials, build dozens of prototypes, and spend seasons punishing them in the world's most extreme conditions. The work is the guide, and Patagonia never tires of exploring, learning, and improving. Be sure to check out Patagonia's new Swift Current waders, repatterned and redesigned for bulk reduction, reduced seam stress, increased maneuverability, and improved repairability. Made from recycled materials without intentionally added PFAS, Swift Current waders move better in and out of the water. So we are back with 30 names every angler should know, and without further ado, our guests today, the legendary Bryan O'Keefe and the legendary BRYAN GREGSON. Fellas, welcome back to Waypoints.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for having us back.
Yep, always fun to be here.
Well, you guys are veterans of the show. You've done several episodes with us in the past, and I couldn't think of two better individuals to have this conversation with. This is a little bit different for Waypoints. In 75 episodes or whatever it's been that we've done, we've never really tackled a topic like this, but after our great night hanging out in Denver with that whole crew, I thought it was fitting that we revisit that conversation in the format of a podcast, right? I mean, there's so many names that really need to be out there and that I think a lot of people might not know but should. So before we dive right into the list of 30 greats, I want to ask you guys a few questions about the current state of our sport, just to maybe lay a little bit of background on this conversation. We're going to make an effort to lay some groundwork and perhaps answer the questions of why exactly we're talking about these pioneers today. So first off, is it safe to say that the lack of knowledge and awareness when it comes to so many of these pioneers and game changers in fly fishing is something that applies to most anglers under, say, the age of like 40 or 45? What are your thoughts on that?
I was going to defer to my elder Bryan O'Keefe, but since I'm the youngest, I'll go first. I think we've lost a lot of the historical aspects of who did what and when and why. And probably that reason is how people learn. I think when I'm almost 50, so I'm still the young guy in the room, but we learned we had, mentors and books and, there is no secrets on fly fishing. You just have to open a book and read it. And I think that the newer generation is learning from YouTube and selfie video type of folks.
Yeah, there's actually thousands of hours of videotape, VHS, DVDs, that nobody has the machines to run that anymore. So a lot of it is just sort of sitting in shelves and gathering dust. And, people on our list, Billy Pate and Jack Dennis, and all these guys were very influential in the day with their true films, not video films, So
Yep.
A lot of the technology has just gone past our history books. And so the access to the older guys is in book form, and you have to make an effort to do that.
It's funny you mentioned that. I still have like all my old Scientific Anglers VHS tape collection, of the greats of Lonnie Waller and Billy Pate and all that. It's like
Gary Borger.
Yeah, good luck finding a VHS player to watch those tapes, right? I mean, I didn't save that. I saved all the tapes for some reason. I don't know. Well, I feel that today we're living in a world, and certainly in a sport, where generations of anglers and fly fishing enthusiasts have stopped learning about the history of the sport and the names of those who gave us so much of what we have today. And to your point, Bryan O'Keefe, that it's, unless you're picking up books or really making a concerted effort to go back and immerse yourself in the history of the sport, this isn't stuff that's naturally just being thrown out there on an Instagram feed or in, social media today.
Yeah, and another thing is, if you call fly fishing a sport or a recreation or a hobby, we don't really have stats. It's not on-base percentage and, longest field goal or, any kind of track and field records, those are real black and white, pretty easy to identify the best just by statistics. And so what makes these people on our list, candidates for, say, the most influential or most respected or best, it really comes down to time on the water and where you go and how you did the basics really well, casting, reading water, tying flies, that sort of thing. So, it's hard to look at a guy at a sports show and think, oh, he's not a home run hitter. He's not throwing touchdown passes, but man, can that guy fish?
Yeah. Well, Greg, let me ask you this. I mean, at what point, because we all grew up and, I don't feel like we're all that old, but we grew up, reading these books and kind of coming of age, knowing who a lot of these key players and, OG pioneers were. At what point did that change where younger anglers coming to the sport aren't really learning about who these people were, or who are, kind of the forefathers of the sport? And not even that long ago, right? I mean, sometimes 20, 30 years ago, but people that gave so much to fly fishing that, there was so much innovation or creation or education, whatever those factors were that made them the greats. When did those people kind of stop factoring into an immersion or a learning process in the sport?
I'd say, from my opinion, it's probably day and age of social media, or the digital age, the internet, if you will. It allowed a lot of information to be out there, and it turned into, rather than being information about how to catch the fish or what you're doing, it was more information about the angler, so to speak. And so you kind of lost, in my opinion, a lot of knowledge. It just kind of shifted. And then you had younger people who were newer to the sport taking marketing roles and gravitating to probably the same age group and the same type of knowledge group. And then we have it a little mess what we have today.
Well, O'Keefe, let me ask you this. I mean, let's say that somebody who is 50 years old is a fly fisherman, but they found their way to the sport, say, in the last decade or so. Same thing. They didn't enter into a situation or atmosphere where a lot of these older names or pioneers are celebrated or taught these days.
Yeah, and I think basically it comes down to lifestyle to a degree. There are a few of us who live near great water, fish almost every day, and we really rack up time and experience. So someone that came into it kind of late and might have the money to kind of buy his way into being a great angler by going with great guides, going to lodges. But really, when you're with a guide every day, they do all the thinking, and you're supposed to, do your part of the bargain too. But I really respect the guys that started out fishing as kids, maybe did some fly shop or guiding in the younger days, and then just found a way to get around and chase dreams and, get after it, maybe at the sacrifice of having a family or a good job, but,
A steady girlfriend, living pets.
House plant.
Well, Gregson, is it possible to do a top 30 list? I mean, in kind of the opening introduction to this episode, I talked about, hey, we settled on 30, could have been 100, but I mean, where do you draw the line? Because there's so many people that have made these great contributions.
Well, I think that was hard. I think when you're first asked to write down names, I just started writing down names and, go in the Word document and select all and number them. And it's like, man, I'm literally at 100.
Yeah.
Like, how do you narrow this down?
It's pretty tough. Because you leave off a lot of people that should be on that list.
Yeah, so you're like, okay, if this, then that. Well, since this person, you thought, but actually they learned it from this person. And so, okay, this other person would probably be on the list. Everybody should be on the list, but it's very difficult to narrow it down.
Yeah, which is why we could easily do a second episode of the next 30 and then the next 30 after that. Who knows where this can go? We'll see if anyone likes this and listens and learns anything. Right. But, I think we can blame people on some level for no longer studying their history these days or perhaps for failing to really dive in and learn about the earlier days of the sport or the legends of the sport. But let me ask you guys this. Does the industry itself share in this blame? Have we seen companies and industry leaders, and to your point, Gregson, some of the marketing execs that work with these companies, trade out a celebration of the greats of fly fishing for the allure of kind of insta-famous, social media savvy hustlers? Is that the new way we market and sell fly fishing, is through who has the most likes on InstaFace or whatever it might be?
Yeah, definitely. The more likes you have, the better angler you are, it seems like.
Who knew?
Yeah, no, I think the industry as a whole is to blame. I think that we're marketing to ourselves a lot. I think that probably people don't know, so they're easy to gravitate on social media and who has the most likes, and you can, oh, this person is doing that, we'll just pull them in our plug, and then other marketing people saw that person was in something, so they must be credible.
Next thing you know, they're getting a free SUV.
So, and the whole baseline just shifted. You know, it's just kind of like the hatches. A new person, oh, the hatches are great. You talk to an older person, the hatches are diminished. The baseline's just shifted.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on that, Mr. O'Keefe?
Yeah, that's exactly what I would say. Some of our older traditional companies like Orvis, you know, they had a genuine problem 20 years ago of their customer aging out. And I think thanks to Tom Rosenbauer and just a good mindset, they went after a younger customer and they succeeded. So, you know, you can't really blame, you know, some marketing people when they see this shift of demographic to lean towards social media. And, you know, we all say that with kind of apologetic look on our face, but it's true. And as good and bad as it is, it's an easy and inexpensive way to reach a lot of anglers. Consequently, you know, don't reach certain people who probably grew up reading the books and following Outdoor Life magazine and that sort of thing.
Well, back in 2021, one of the industry's fly fishing magazines wrote an article titled "The 50 Most Influential Fly Fishers," the people who changed the face of fly fishing over the past decades, right? And that was the name of the article. Now, this was a ranked top 50 type list that, of course, included many of the greats, for sure, but it also included a handful of younger generation anglers. Are we at a point where someone, say in their early 30s, that, you know, has a lot of Instagram followers and has been able to travel to cool places and post all about it, can they be considered in the same league with some of these true pioneers? Is that even possible?
Maybe. You know, I mean, looking at snowboarding and skateboarding, I mean, there's a 14-year-old kid who's been skateboarding for 3 or 4 years who's the best in the world. That comes to like ability and natural talent and coordination. I think fly fishing, the knowledge is so vast that it takes so many years to get to where you want to be. You know, I'm sure Brian, at his young, youthful age of 70, he's been fishing just by default 25 years more than I have because I wasn't born yet. So trying to catch up to these guys that have this wealth of knowledge, who've been doing it a long time from the ground floor up, who know how things have got to where we have a tapered leader. I think that now fishing is easier. You don't have to have so much knowledge, but I think that you still have to have a wealth of knowledge to be able to be good at something. It's one thing to go catch a fish on the ranch at the Henry's Fork. Anybody can do that. I think it's another thing to be very consistent on catching fish at all the hatches rather than just the hero hatch.
What are your thoughts, Brian? Is there a barrier to entry on age for being considered, you know, in the upper echelon or one of the greats of fly fishing?
Yeah, I think there is, and I'll just be very specific about it. In that age, just gives you an opportunity to have more experience. So you can learn to cast pretty well. You can learn to strip set on permit and tarpon and bonefish. You can learn some of the basics and go to great places and make incredible videos. But have you been to Belize 35 times? Have you been to New Zealand for 50 years? All those years mean experience, whether it's saltwater, different tides, different weather, different seasons, different species. And man, it takes a long time to really get there to see it all and experience it all, which you never really do, but you learn a lot. And learning is what fly fishing is all about. Every day you learn until the last cast you make.
Well, and you know, a lot of one theme that we've touched on for all kinds of episodes over the many years that Waypoints has been a podcast is the concepts of legitimacy and authenticity, right? And I don't think that those are things you can rush or fake or buy. Those have to be earned, especially in fly fishing. It's really about kind of paying your dues. And it's not to say, younger anglers out there can't be great or might not be at the absolute top of their game or bringing, innovative new techniques or ideas or ways to catch fish. For sure, that can all happen. But there is something to be said for legitimacy and authenticity and the fact that does need to be earned. And that's, time and grade, basically.
Yeah, I think credibility comes by your peer group.
Yeah, oftentimes it does, no doubt about it. Well, do you think that for modern anglers, technology has contributed to the lack of knowledge? And this is kind of a backwards thought, but there's so much tech out there. There's so much information available in the palms of our hands. Has this easy access contributed to the lack of knowledge when it comes to the early pioneers and legends of the sport? I mean, the great Ted Williams, Joe Brooks, says they don't have Instagram pages because they're not around, right? But do people no longer recognize these names because they're no longer reading books? Everything's just done on their phones. And because, these greats and these legends might not have a strong social media presence, a lot of them have largely been forgotten. And is that obviously tied to the fact that there's just not as many people reading some of these great books that were out there that, back in the day, that's kind of how you gained your knowledge, was studying these books.
Yeah, the books were everything. And so is your local fly shop. And the old guys sitting at the table tying, drinking Folgers coffee. I mean, that's where you learned.
Yeah. It's, I just forgot what I was going to say.
That's all right. We got a lot to talk about. Yeah. We'll come back to that. Well, here's a question for you, Mr. O'Keefe. In the end, does it even matter? I mean, do modern day anglers even need to know about these people anymore? Or can they easily be dismissed and relegated to the dustbin of fly fishing history? Have we moved past these greats and they're no longer relevant?
Well, I think it boils down to, are you serious about fly fishing? And if you are, I think you should just naturally, evolve into a person who learns the background and the history of the sport. And what I was going to say a minute ago was that all the people on our list, I think every single one of them was a writer, an author. And some wrote 50 books, some wrote 2 or 3. But these people won big awards in the literary world through what was called Fly Fishing, or the Federation of Fly Fishing back then, now Fly Fishing International, Trout Unlimited, all kinds of people, Nature Conservancy, all these people won amazing awards. But it was mainly for their contribution through books. And those books were on casting, tying, and fishing. So pretty well-rounded, skillful, artistic, and intelligent people.
And all very willing to share their knowledge with others, which I think was such a crucial part of the evolution of the sport, right? Was their willingness, to take what they learned over decades of, being on the water or at the Vice or wherever it may, studying insects, whatever it was, and share that with the rest of the world to kind of bring the whole sport forward. I think that was key.
And they're all, reading the books, they all mentioned another angler that they learned from. You read Mike Lawson's books or Renee Harrop's books, and they all mention where they got that idea from. They're very respectful on how they came about and where they got to today.
Yeah. Constant evolution.
Yeah. So it's like, I got a chubby and a Paragon.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you like fly fishing?
All right, so let's do this. Let's jump in to our 30 names that we've selected to talk about today. I'm gonna throw a name out there. Now, again, these are in no particular order, and then you guys can agree or disagree that they should be on the list. I think we'll probably all agree because we've had this conversation before. But we can let our listeners know a little bit about this person and why they should be considered one of the all-time greats. I'm going to start off with number 1 right here, and we're going to break our rule of that 40s to 90s kind of time frame. We're going to go back a little earlier than that, and that is number 1, the name of Theodore Gordon. He had to make the list because he's the father of dry fly fishing.
Yeah, he was born in 1854, and he's actually one of the first anglers in the United States to sort of hybridize traditional English fly patterns. Actually, the quill gourd being his most famous fly, which is still a good fly today, and it could be adapted again into a parachute or a hackle stacker or something like that. But good fly pattern, advocate of dry fly fishing. And one reason I really thought he was a cool guy is his friends described him as a hermit.
Yeah, he was focused.
I can relate to that.
He couldn't be bothered to like have relationships and ongoing conversations. Right. He was just on the water. Yeah, Theodore Gordon. He also advocated for lighter rods, finer leaders, precise casting. He really kind of not only created the concept of dry fly fishing, but set the standard for modern dry fly presentation. So this guy's a legend.
Yeah.
He
championed all the adaptations from the English style of fishing into the American style of fishing. Yeah.
And the English anglers that you mentioned earlier, they actually were sort of tenkara fishing. They had long wooden rods, if you can call it that, and some line, maybe horsehair or something, and they dapped the fly. Like dapping is still a technique, but they didn't have reels on a lot of those early rods. So by the time Theodore Gordon came along, there was reels, and I still think in leader had to be catgut or horsehair.
Yeah, right.
I've always wanted to make a horsehair leader, so next time I see you guys, I'll tell you all about it.
That's how that worked out for me.
Yeah.
We use dental floss for dapping as kids. That's not what we're allowed to use.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think like Dame Juliana Berners was out there working on her double haul,
No.
With a modern reel. I mean, so yeah, they were basically tenkara fishing, just kind of dapping it. Along comes Theodore Gordon, who not only had these great fly patterns, but also really focused on presentation, on how to deliver that fly. So guy's a total legend, has to be on the list, no doubt. Number 2, we're going to talk about Henry Leon Wolfe, also better known as Lee. Maybe arguably the toughest son of a bitch in the history of fly fishing.
Yeah, toughest. I mean, I think we were talking about stories where I think O'Keefe, you're telling us that he used to taught himself how to fly so he'd go fishing.
Yeah,
and then getting a mosquito laden areas and just strip buck naked. I think you're telling us, O'Keefe, that get bit by mosquitoes so that he could fish the next 2 weeks without being bothered by them.
Yeah, he would get out of his float plane in the bush of Alaska, basically be naked and say, "Bring it," and just get eaten alive, and then immediately build up that tolerance and be good for the rest of his trip.
Yeah, I met Lee probably in the mid '80s, and still broad-shouldered, stood erect like a fence post, a tough, burly guy. Not burly so much as wiry, but 6'2", good-looking guy. And a lot of people don't know he was born in Valdez, Alaska, 1905. I mean,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that weird?
So he grew up tough.
Had to be, yeah. And so he wrote 8 books and made some of the first fly fishing films. I remember some of them. And this is 16 millimeter film of when he went blue water fishing for some sort of marlin or sailfish, and he was using a 7-foot fly rod. It was really out there, very much sort of experimental and a novelty. But he pushed the boundaries quite a bit. He's famous for jumping off a bridge in his waders to prove that you wouldn't drown immediately, and he possibly invented the first fly fishing vest. But he was kind of a wild man too. He went to the Stanford School of Engineering.
I never knew that.
Nope. Yeah. And he had 4 wives, so.
Not all at the same time.
No, not really. And then, when he died in a plane crash, he had 2 flight instructors with me. He was 80-something years old, 86 years old when he was renewing his pilot's license. Like, God. And, that was a horrible day. I remember it, actually. But, he was an artist. He went to France to study art. Yeah, really interesting
He's
person.
a Renaissance man.
Yeah.
By far. He was an early pioneer of catch and release fishing, advocated for releasing wild fish long before it became standard. He also was the innovator of so many game-changing fly patterns, including the Wolf series of flies, the Royal Wolf that every angler certainly knows. Well, that's where it came from. It came from Lee. Developed modern fly fishing gear and techniques. You said the fly fishing vest. No one's ever been like, God, I wonder who invented that.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of good argument out there that it was Lee Wolfe that invented it. And he was an early explorer of very, very remote fisheries, like you were just talking about, Brian. Developed, popularized Atlantic salmon fishing in Newfoundland and Labrador. And he was a great filmmaker as well.
Yeah, one thing, like Theodore Gordon being a hermit, Lee claims that he could fish in the Catskill Mountains for trout for a week for $3.50. Gas, food and
Unbelievable.
camping out. I
That's
love that.
unbelievable. Me too. I didn't realize when I started reading about Lee Moore just on the podcast, I didn't realize he crashed his planes multiple times.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it wasn't just like the fatal one. It was like he's done it many times before.
Yeah. No, he was a total wild man and one of the originals. And just, as we said, just a tough SOB back in the day.
I love that.
For sure. Well, next person on the list, and they really were a team, and that was Joan Wolfe, right? Often known as the first lady of fly fishing. And she was an absolute just player when it came to fly fishing techniques, casting, and being, I guess you would call it kind of an exhibit or performance caster in a lot of places.
Yeah. In fact, she grew up in a fishing family, started fly fishing at age 10, and then entered her first national fly casting championships, distance competition with men. It wasn't men or women because there weren't women doing it. Along came Joan, and she won national distance casting championships at age 16 against men, and then won consecutively 1943 to 1960.
Every year.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. 17 or something national casting championships.
And I think she's 99 right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
I saw her a few years ago, just looking great. She's one of the nicest people ever, not just in the business, but in life in general. And she's just been true to the sport, really serious about proper technique and etiquette, and more power to Joan Wolfe.
Yeah, she's an absolute legend. And I mean, I remember some great photos, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was something like a World's Fair or something like that. And she was doing these casting demonstrations, and she had on, a beautiful dress, and she looked like she was right straight out of a fashion magazine and just bringing it with her casts.
Yeah.
I think she was doing 2 rods at one time during that same kind of photo shoot, expose or whatever you want to call it. But
Yeah.
I remember Joan as a kid. We'd go to the Best of the West, casting competitions and even the trade shows, and you'd always want to go talk to her. She was super cool, and she helped you. Whatever you had a question of casting or whatever, you'd go and, she's like our grandma. She'd have rosy cheeks, and there's Joan. Let's go. As a young kid, say hi, and she was always super helpful.
Yeah,
Super
wonderful
cool.
woman.
Unbelievable.
And she has
caster.
been a huge advocate for women in fly fishing. Definitely broke gender barriers in what was, that had always been a male-dominated sport. Inspired a lot of women to find their way to fly fishing.
Yeah, her schools.
Yeah. The Wolf School of Fly Fishing.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Co-founded that. Absolutely. Well, next on the list, Vince Marinaro. All right. This is the author of a modern dry fly code, revolutionized dry fly fishing with a scientific approach to trout behavior and rise forms. I guarantee you there's a lot of people listening that have not heard this name before. But tell us a little bit about Vince.
Well, Marinaro I first stumbled on him through a friend because it was about photography, and I was reading I think Harrop's books and Lawson's books, and they all mention him. Craig's book, everybody mentions Vincent Marinaro, and he had photographed how I caught him was on still water with a spinner fly and photographing underneath. Nowadays, that's pretty common. My iPhone shoots underwater, but back then in the 30s and 20s, I mean, you had to develop a whole housing, a whole system, had to have a vision of what you're trying to do. And his Paris spinner, more or less, of the hackle going perpendicular to the water, changed the game of spinner dry fly fishing. I mean, I own modern dry fly code. I own the Ring and the Rise. I mean, they're both, as Jurasek would say, they're a little outdated now, but they're written, in the 30s. But there's so much information in there, and so many people who are still alive today credit him with all of their patterns, or at least the idea of it.
Yeah, Vince was born 115 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
So you have to wrap your head around that some of these people were doing this before there were cars, so it was, it's just wild. And some of these people traveled the world by crazy forms of transportation. And
Pre-iPhone.
My grandparents were born in the 1800s, and they rode on stagecoaches. So I can appreciate how passionate some people are back in the day without our Gore-Tex and, great waders and great tip, etc. But Vincent, he was an observer. He would watch insects. Like you said, Brian, he photographed trout rising forms, the ring of the rise, and came to conclusions about how they fed. But, from his photography and notes, the flies like the no hackle actually came out a long time ago. Then the comparidon, which was really groundbreaking for the silhouette, not a full hackle dry fly. It was very different. And then, in real life, he was a lawyer and very intellectual, and his hobbies are cool. Included Indian craft, all things Native American as far as outdoor type stuff, hunting, gathering, that sort of thing, tracking. He played the violin. He was really a first kind of amateur entomologist in our sport, and a lot of that information we still use today. He was into shotguns and hunting with shotguns, photography, culinary art. So he's really into cooking, and he's given credit for identifying the Baetis.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah, it was just a little bug. But thanks to him, he got it alongside the other great mayflies as, one of our favorite hatches. And but I think he's known for his bamboo rod making, being very opinionated, but also a real thinker, observer, and innovator. And so my hat goes off to Vince Marinero. In fact, I think I have a picture of him on my phone. I want to show you guys. No one else can see this, but I want you to describe this. Just 1 second.
Didn't he create the fly pattern of the thorax? Wasn't that
I don't
him?
know, but I mean, think about that.
I think
basically the man who invented the Baetis. Think about that today.
Okay, now tell me what you're looking at. What's he wearing?
Oh, he is wearing. This is a black and white picture of Vince Marinero. He is wearing an old school kind of geezer pleaser like trucker hat.
It's a flat brim trucker hat.
He also is the innovator of the flat brim hat for all the fishing bros out there.
right.
You can add that to the list of.
Yeah, you
Vince's
think you're an
accomplishments.
innovator with your trucker hat. This is a trucker hat, Brian. Look at that.
Yeah, looks like my grandpa.
This guy was amazing. He, his studies about different trout rises really helped anglers for decades match the hatch more effectively. I mean, his contributions are unbelievable, and somebody who should absolutely be on this list.
Rise forms is an incredible study.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, next up, one of my favorite individuals of all time, Mel Krieger. And Mel, who passed away in 2008, was involved in the industry and at consumer shows and being out there right up until the very end. Just an absolute gentleman. I know you guys knew Mel. He contributed so much to this sport.
Yeah, Mel. I was young when Mel started. Had all his casting and fishing schools in West Yellowstone, and I think that's where we all, at least people my age and younger in my crew, ran into Mel and knew of Mel was from those. But once you learn about Mel, I mean, he's a global ambassador for fly fishing.
Oh yeah, I mean, he pioneered a lot of the stuff in South America throughout Patagonia. I remember it's probably 20 years ago. Going down to the airport, I think it was in Bariloche, I forget, but the entire little terminal they had down there was massive, giant black and white photos of Mel Krieger casting. And this guy just made such an impression throughout the world when it came to fly casting and the sport itself.
Yeah, I really appreciated Mel. I got to fish with him for a week in Chile and a week in Alaska, just kind of random luck. But I worked at a lodge in Alaska on the Naknek River in the late 70s, and his son, it'll come to me in a minute. He and I were the guides there, and so Mel, of course, came up to visit, and he was just such a pleasant guy. He wasn't a see me guy, and I can do this, I can cast a mile. He was considered fly fishing's poet, and so naturally, you would assume then it's a kind of a mild-mannered person and a great speaker, a great lecturer, and I just always thought he would be a great ambassador from the United States going around the world fly fishing because he was just such a nice, personable guy.
Yeah, and total gentleman. He had his floppy Gilligan hat that he always wore.
Yeah.
He was fly fishing's poet. I mean, he was from San Francisco and kind of grew up in that era, and just a fascinating guy, and as humble and nice as God, and a unbelievable casting instructor.
Yep, he was a great communicator.
Yeah, one of his books, The Essence of Fly Casting, still an absolute classic. Yep. Yeah. Well, next on the list, number 6, A.J. McLean. And this is another guy who kind of falls into, I always think, and obviously I never met A.J. McLean. He passed in 1991, but would have fallen squarely into like the badass category along with Lee Wolf and some of the other greats. He was the longtime fishing editor of Field and Stream magazine. And this was when Field and Stream was like the deal. It was the most important outdoor magazine in the game. He worked for Field and Stream for over 30 years and really was responsible for shaping modern angling journalism. One more thing about McLean, he had McLean's Standard Fishing Encyclopedia, which if you were a kid in the 70s, 80s, 90s, you grew up with a copy of his fishing encyclopedia, one of the most comprehensive fishing references ever written. It covered every aspect of fishing. It was like the Bible when you were a kid.
He was a huge proponent of fishing practices, if I remember right, like more ethical way of angling.
Yeah. Big conservation advocate early on. He also promoted global fly fishing travel. That was kind of his big passionate things. And one of the cool things that A.J. McLean was involved in, a lot of people don't realize this, was one of the earliest saltwater fly fishing operations. McLean, along with angler Gil Drake Sr., discovered the exceptional bone fishing opportunities on the east end of Grand Bahama. They recognized his potential and they built Deepwater Key Club, which opened in 1958, one of the first dedicated bone fishing lodges in the Bahamas. So just a total stud when it came to global fly fishing at the time.
Yeah, and of course, give me the 5-minute rule. I just remembered Jan Krieger was Mel Krieger's son. Sometimes it takes a minute, but great guy. He teaches in Costa Rica right now. But anyway, I feel like I really know A.J. McLean. I almost feel like I fished with him because for quite a few years I did a lot of photography for Field and Stream magazine, and I went on trips with the editor Duncan Barnes. And Duncan and AJ worked together for years, and so every day, Duncan would have a reference to AJ did this or AJ liked to do that, and it was just neat because I lugged that 8-pound, 10-pound encyclopedia around with me. I eventually have donated most of my fishing books because I move it around too much, so I wanted to go to good places. But you almost want to save that one forever because if you're writing an article and you need the Latin name of a mutton snapper, you go up to mutton snapper and there's all this information. There's the different plates and pictures. That book in itself is, well, it's the best reference book I've ever had, except for just specific entomology. But he was a pretty cool guy. He was trained in fisheries biology, so he put a lot of science into his writing, and he was very, very good, colorful writer. So AJ was a pretty neat guy.
Pretty neat guy. Yeah, absolute pioneer, especially on the global forefront. All right, number 7, Ernie Schwiebert. Let's talk about him. Passed away in 2005, one of the great chroniclers of fly fishing history and entomology. This is a name that everybody needs to know. Author of a book, a little famous book called Matching the Hatch, which came out first in 1955.
Yeah, I think, from my books and knowledge of old Ernie Schwiebert is that he took modern day patterns with aquatic insects and kind of matched them that way. That's kind of what I remember from Ernie Schwiebert the most. I've got a lot of books by him. I still use them as references.
Oh yeah, they're timeless. And he died at age 74 in 2005, and primarily he was an architect, and he had 2 doctorate degrees from Ohio State and Princeton. Wrote 15 books on fly fishing and architecture, and Matching the Hatch, Nymph, Salmon of the World,
Trout,
and the 2-volume Trout. I had that forever. Really proud of it. It was rather expensive, and he was one of the founders of Trout Unlimited, and he was on the board of FFI, then FFF, and director of the Atlantic Salmon Foundation. I don't even know where these people found all the time to do this stuff. And
because they weren't staring at their iPhones.
Yeah.
That's why.
And he also worked with the Nature Conservancy. So that's just a heck of a list of great organizations. And the way I describe Ernie Schwiebert's writing to my friends is it's the opposite of Chat GPT. These are real thoughts done on pen and paper and then finally to a typewriter. And I bet he suffered years and years and years on a chapter. Just one of those guys. He was attention to detail all the way, very accurate. And like you just said, very, very much as good as new right now.
Yeah.
He is a name that gets referenced by so many of the other greats on this list. I mean, he had such an impact on people and a resume that might be the most stacked of anyone in the history of fly fishing. He did it all.
Yeah, including conservation groups.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, next on the list, number 8, and this is a name that I would guess most of our listeners know, John Gierach. He passed away in 2024, a master of fly fishing storytelling, and a lot of times considered kind of the voice of modern fly fishing. I mean, he was a guy who blended humor, wisdom, and real-world angling experiences in over 20 books that he wrote throughout his career, and also just one of the nicest guys you could ever talk to.
Yeah, John is incredible. I think, Trout Bum was very famous word and book. What's that? The other one's Sex, Death, and Fly Fishing. Yeah, I think that was a pretty popular one.
Yeah,
he's kind of like your modern day like literary guy who's typing on a typewriter and then go out and catch fish and do it all over again, smoking a cigar or a pipe, I guess.
Yeah, cigarettes too.
Yeah.
The Wall Street Journal described him as the voice of the common angler, and that is perfect. When you see a picture of him, he's in kind of well-worn waders and scruffy regular dude.
Old Filson hat that he wore everywhere.
Crusty old hat, and he was kind of crusty, but he was the real deal. Good angler, fishes bamboo for sure. And when he goes to some of the shows, when he did, unfortunately, he passed away recently. He agonized over being in the spotlight. He'd have to sit in the author's booth and sign books and do that sort of thing. And he did it, of course, but
he didn't like it.
It wasn't his thing. He was probably just in there signing books, making a simple conversation with people, thinking, "Gosh, I know that blue-wing olive hatch is coming off right now." So,
totally.
But let's see here, what else?
He was a guy that didn't need to necessarily travel the world, although he went to some exotic places. But most of his writings centered around like his home waters on Colorado and throughout the northern Rockies. He could write about that and appreciate those fisheries in his own backyard just as much as he might a bonefish flat or a steelhead river up north or some exotic fishing locale. I mean, that's what really, to your point, Brian, made him kind of the voice of the common angler.
Yeah. He loved his home waters, and he wrote a book almost every year. And I think he just did the very best job of coming up with titles. And so here's a few of them. Of course, the Trout Bum. And then View from Rat Lake, Sex, Death, and Fly Fishing, Where Trout Are As Long As Your Leg, Even Brook Trout Get the Blues, Dances with Trout, Standing in a River Waving a Stick, Death, Taxes, and Leaky Waders. And what's sort of ironic, his last book was titled All the Time in the World. And then when that book came out, he died about 8 months later. But we don't all have all the time in the world, but I have a feeling John was able to, really come full circle in his whole world of fly fishing for our benefit. And, he was just an amazing guy. What's interesting, too, is Federation of Fly Fishers gave him the Roderick Haig Brown Award for writing 31 years ago. So he had to be a very popular, established writer 31 years ago to get that award, and then carried on through all of those books I just mentioned and more.
Yeah, and keep producing. Well, next on our list, and I'm glad you just mentioned it, number 9, Roderick Haig Brown, a legendary conservationist and the poet of wild rivers. This is a guy who had quite a legacy in British Columbia, his home waters that he was so proud of. He was a great writer, an environmentalist, and really one of the first in the industry to document and promote fly fishing for steelhead in the Pacific Northwest. He was quite a guy, and there's a reason that, awards are named after him. You're honored if you were to win the Roderick Haig Brown Award because of what this guy meant to this sport.
Yeah, he's a big deal, especially in the as far as the literary and conservation aspects, British Columbia.
Yeah, he fought for the protection of Pacific salmon, steelhead, and wild rivers in British Columbia before anybody else was really talking about this. I mean, he was the real deal.
Seems like a lot of these guys were, even we go back to the last 5 names we named, they were all heavily invested in protecting the places they loved.
Yeah, that's one of the most common threads through this whole list. In addition to that, how many of them were involved with FFF back in the day?
Yeah.
And being called FFI now. It's kind of like X and Twitter. But, Roderick was born in England, like a lot of our people on the early lists here, and he was born in 1908. And his father was a prolific writer. He wrote about military, sports, and the outdoors. And so at an early age, Roderick moved to Seattle, then went up to British Columbia to be with an uncle, and he worked in a logging camp on Lake Nimkish. And I think the Nimkish River has a great steelhead run, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, he went back to England and to get some higher education, but kicked out of school for drinking and sneaking out at night.
Perfect.
See, another one of my buddies.
This guy could have hung, no problem.
And he actually might have moved to Seattle after that, but he went over to the States and then back to England and back. In fact, I think he met his wife in Seattle, and he worked up, originally as a logger and commercial fisherman, but he was a skilled writer even in his early days. And his first book I read a long time ago, might have been in high school. It was Silver, The Life of an Atlantic Salmon. Very interesting. And then some of his other books, I can just list them off. There was Fisherman's Spring, Fisherman's Summer, Fisherman's Fall, Fisherman's Winter. Those were all real easy. And I think he wrote probably 15 books. And
A River Never Sleeps.
Never,
One of his
that
classics.
is a really good book.
Yeah.
And he was up in Campbell River, which is a cute little town, great fishing, saltwater and freshwater. And he did so much conservation work that in British Columbia, they named a mountain after him and a provincial park.
Well, there you
Pretty
go.
cool.
Yeah, he was quite the guy. Roderick Haig Brown, number 9 on the list. Number 10, Gary LaFontaine, another guy that we were all fortunate enough to know over the years, passed away in 2002. This is the author of Caddisflies, a groundbreaking book that really revolutionized how anglers fish caddis hatches. He did a lot for the sport, and you guys both knew Gary. I mean, anytime you pull a caddis out of your fly box, whether it's an elk hair caddis, whether it's a sparkle pupil, whatever it might be, I personally can't help but think of LaFontaine and just, he was Mr. Caddis.
Oh yeah, I mean, in the Madison River, that's my memories of Gary LaFontaine, and the sparkle pupa. I think was the most revolutionary fly at the time, especially with caddis, and how they came up with the idea and all the hours they spent not fishing but just investigating the bugs. I mean, it's really cool.
Yeah, swimming in the river and studying these bugs.
Did you guys know he went to the University of Montana in
did.
Missoula?
Yeah.
Which is so cool because he was born in Connecticut. And,
Well, his daughter lives over there. I think she's she was in his crew tying flies and fishing.
and his cool little dog, I forget his name though.
Oh, that's a good trivia question.
Yeah.
Remember the dog, don't remember the name.
Yeah, it'll be my 5-minute rule. But, he was also a prison guard
I did not know that.
in Montana. He doesn't seem to have the personality.
No, when you
for
would
that.
meet Gary, like the least
Sweetest.
prison guard-like demeanor, you could...
Sweetest guy
yeah.
you'll ever meet. One of my favorite stories about Gary, but doesn't really involve him. I was walking up an old railroad grade on the Deschutes. I saw 2 guys in a riffle fishing away. And I saw the net come out a couple times, so they were doing pretty well. And as I got a little closer, since they were in the river, they were talking real loud to each other over the sound of the water. And one guy yells to the other one, "What did we ever do before the deep sparkle pupa?" And they were living proof. They were just hammering those beautiful Deschutes red sides on that fly. And I've never not had one in my fly box. It's just a staple. But great guy, unfortunately, died of ALS at the age of 56. And if you ever want to Google something pretty interesting, he did a video with Jack Dennis and Mike Lawson. And it was Jack doing kind of a tribute to Gary. And Gary was in a wheelchair at that time. And he got to speak and thank everybody for buying his books, and real gracious. He talked about his situation and how he was hoping to kick it and all that stuff. It's just a fantastic thing. You could easily Google all that and listen to it. It's very touching.
Yeah, he was a gentleman and did a lot for the sport. No doubt about it. Number 11 on the list, one of my favorite people to spend time with. Still very much in the game and an absolute character and definition of legend is Stu Apt. Stu is a fly fishing legend in saltwater. He was known for years for catching massive tarpon and really being at the forefront of those early saltwater years. Definitely a pioneer in saltwater fishing. But one of the interesting things about Stu, and this is like, you could say you could write a book about this. And in fact, he did write a book about this, but he was a longtime pilot for Pan Am. Back when Pan Am Airways was like the king of international travel. He flew 747s, and you can imagine the swagger of a Pan Am 747 pilot. The stories are absolutely hilarious when Stu gets going on this. There was not too many things he didn't do in his lifetime. Flew in the Navy, was a war pilot.
Military pilot.
Yeah, and brought that same intensity of flying planes in combat or big commercial flights to his saltwater fishing. He's the real deal.
He developed a couple really innovative flies at the time. I mean, still use those flies.
Yeah, the Apt style tarpon flies are still standard.
Yeah, and he was a fighter pilot in the Korean War, and I think people that did that, and then like you said, being a Pan Am pilot, the creme de la creme of airlines at the time, he brought that attention of detail to his fishing, and he invented knots, and I bet he was just a super technician about gear, rigging, and technique. It would just be a natural for him to live that way, but tough guy, still going after it, and he's been on a few other podcasts, and it's just fun to hear him talk or hear him tell some stories. He's been there and done that.
Oh yeah, he's the kind of guy that if you were hanging out with Stu and you were both in like your early 30s. He's the kind of guy you wanted to go to the bar with, but he was definitely leaving with the best looking girl in the bar. You were going to get whatever.
He still looks pretty tough at 90 something.
Yeah,
he's a stud. Yeah, I mean, and Stu's great in his stories. He spent a lot of years living here in Montana, and we had some great dinners over at his house with he and his lovely wife, and my business partner Ian and I would bring our wives over, and the dinner conversations would just get hilarious. He would go back to those old Pan Am stories, and it's like, wow, this guy in his prime must have been something. But an absolute saltwater innovator, total pioneer in saltwater, known, obviously very well in the Florida Keys, but fished the Bahamas, did a lot of early trips to Cuba back in the day when people weren't fly fishing down there, and still going strong today in mid-90s. I mean, the guy's still after it.
And he, I think, came to Montana in the early 60s, and I think I heard this on the Millhouse podcast that he had fished Montana something like 25 years in a row. Well, again, more power to that. That is so cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he's something. Well, number 12 on the list, again, we are not ranking these orders, so they're in no particular order, but if they were, this obviously could have been number one on the list, but that is Mr. Lefty Kreh, who sadly passed away in 2018, but hands down, one of the most influential fly casters of all time, and arguably you could call him the godfather of fly fishing, certainly the most well-known fly fisher of all time.
Yeah. I remember catching wind of... from the photography side of things, I don't know if there's how much truth there is to it, but there was always this rumor of Lefty had a boat with two different sides painted different colors. And we always oh, that's very clever. You could shoot, one side darker cover, split the boat around, looks like a different place, it's a different color. I don't know how much truth there ever was to that, but it inspired us to do a lot of kind of thinking like that with creative media.
Well, he was obviously an incredible fly casting instructor, was a wonderful teacher, so giving of his time, really became the face of fly casting instruction for generations of anglers. An incredible fly tyer, created a little fly called the Lefty's Deceiver. Maybe you've heard of it.
It was actually used on a postage stamp.
Yeah, I was just going to say it was such a popular fly they put it on a U.S. stamp. I mean, think about that. But aside from all those other accomplishments, he was just an incredible ambassador for the sport of fly fishing.
Yeah, he really was. And, he was a decorated World War II soldier in the Battle of the Bulge, just incredibly deadly and horrible. And he was, subjected to anthrax poisoning, and everybody that got it died except him. And so he was in almost a lifelong study, medical study of anthrax. They even named a variant of the poison, it was Lefty Cray. What's his first name? It was
Bernard.
Yeah, Bernard Lefty
Yeah.
Cray. So it was like a BLK variant. So he's got a some
A disease strain named after
Yes,
him.
exactly.
As well as a postage stamp. Yeah.
But he was a writer for the Baltimore Sun, and so was Joe Brooks.
Yep.
And so that's interesting. They ended up fishing together, and Lefty would say that Joe was his mentor. And another one who thought he was his mentor was, let me just think a second, Stu Apt. So we just talked about Stu. So Stu and Lefty considered Joe Brooks, their mentor, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then, Lefty just did it all. He was so approachable. I bet more fly fishermen, women would say, "Oh, I met Lefty Cray." And it's because Lefty was out there on the pond and there people were lined up. He would just run them through and teach them and show them stuff, plus go to all kinds of on the grass casting clinics all around the world, sometimes back to back to back to back. He was just a very gracious, generous guy. Tons of jokes. He cleaned them up a little bit in the last 20 years. But and then he did the Buccaneers and Bones TV show with Tom Brokaw.
Yeah.
So I think of Lefty, I think of one thing. There's a guy who lived his life, but probably one of the most generous people in fly fishing.
The Godfather. No doubt about it. Well, next on the list, number 13, a name that I think few people will recognize. Not that known today, but Jim Leisingring. Also sometimes referred to in writing as Eric Leisingring. They're the same person. Died in 1951, an influential American fly fisherman known for his expertise with wet flies, particularly the art of soft hackle fishing. And if you don't think that had an impact on the sport, think again. He had a little technique that has been taught to everyone who's ever nymph fished called the Leisingring lift.
Yep. Everybody uses it. I think people use it and don't even know where it came from. People throwing, a chubby Chernobyl with a dropper on it and hold it at the end. And, the guy will take, just hold it at the end. He'll give a little lift.
Swinging up to the surface.
So he just fished that trigger. I mean, Leisingring was amazing. He was a commercial fisherman with that method in Pennsylvania.
Yeah. And
for trout.
Yeah, and what he did with soft hackle flies really gave, paved the path, I guess you could say, for so much of the subsurface and nymph fishing that goes on today.
Oh, it's insane.
Yeah, and here's another guy born in 1878, not long after the Civil War. I mean, pretty crazy, right?
Yeah, lived to the 50s.
So when did the Civil War end?
67, 65. God, now you're embarrassing me. I should know this.
I know. Well, anyway, that's a while ago. And he actually was more well-known in England because his flies and techniques were, founded there. I think he made them popular here. But do you guys remember the term flimp?
Oh, yeah. I fish a flimp.
Yeah. So it was kind of a forerunner to the soft tackle. And so I think a lot of people listening to this can really relate to this. Could we say that he was the most influential person in swing techniques?
Yes.
Swinging for steelhead, October caddis for trout. Here's a guy, that was his technique. And I've fished with people from the East Coast out here who quarter downstream, mend a couple times, and do a slow swing. Now, it could be a soft tackle, it could be a lead wing coachman, any of those traditional East Coast and in English wet flies. Take a step. Well, that was going on for hundreds of years. Now, steelheaders are thinking, hey, we're pretty hip. We're doing this. Let's go swing fishing. You're like, well, yeah, you're 300 with it now. But
yeah, Leisingring, the Leisingring lift, definitely someone who needs to be on the list without question.
Yes.
Number 14, we already mentioned the name, but Jack Dennis. Legendary guide and fly shop owner, founded Jack Dennis Outdoors in Jackson, the author of Western Trout Fly Tying Manual, definitely one of the leading authorities on fly fishing in the Tetons in the greater Yellowstone region, co-founder of the Jackson Hole One Fly Tournament, which is now 40-some years, I think, in existence, and just an absolute character.
Oh, yeah. I mean, come from the media side of things. I mean, O'Keefe, I'm sure you can agree, but, Jack Dennis had some of the coolest videos at the time especially where we lived here in the Caldera, up the Madison, and with Mike Lawson on the Henry Sport, they're just staples.
Yeah, Jack, has not slowed down much.
No.
He was always in first gear, should be shifting, but he was just going, whether it was a sports show, a club presentation, working at the store, guiding, he was just going a million miles an hour.
It's like the Energizer Bunny.
Yeah, exactly. And, he and Mike Lawson and Gary LaFontaine were the traveling fly fishermen,
Yeah, the
for
three
sport
amigos.
shows, fly clubs. That was incredible and fun. But I just have to think that I'm not sure there's another angler who has fished with so many celebrities.
Oh,
Yeah.
without question.
Arnold, Palmer, and
Yeah, presidents, you name it. Yeah.
movie stars on down the list. And it's just so fun to hang out with Jack. He and I were at Randall Kaufman's house a couple years ago, and Jack saw a vise and just started pulling stuff together. He said, I'm going to tie an Amy's Ant, one of the famous Jack Dennis flies. And it was just sitting there and getting Jack going. It's pretty easy. You ask him, like a little button issue, and he'll just go and go and go. And that's just so much fun. And I guess, again, when I think of Jack, I think about all his fishing accomplishments and the things he's done, the people he's guided and all that. But to me, what Jack Dennis is a guy with a big heart. He cares about people. He stays in touch with people. And he's just a good human being.
Yeah. Endless energy. I once heard Mike Lawson describe him as the only man who was ever diagnosed with whirling disease. He just never stops. He's just constantly spinning.
Yeah.
Well, next on the list, number 15, you already mentioned his name, and absolutely one of the all-time great icons, Joe Brooks. Just an amazing individual known as the man who popularized fly fishing. He pioneered fly fishing travel. He was a legendary outdoor writer, certainly a huge innovator in saltwater fly fishing, and a massive television star, host of the American Sportsman on ABC. I mean, this guy did it all. Joe Brooks is one of the all-time total studs in the world of fly fishing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's buried right over here on Livingston.
Yep.
On Nelson's property. He created the spring creeks over there and helped create them, I guess I should say, and come up with a way to conserve them. And many, many years ago, we were targeting this giant brook trout in Argentina. And as I was doing the research, come to find out, Joe Brooks ran a tournament, I think, on ESPN at the same lake that I was, trying to find. That thought was like very secret. It's like, oh no, it's not a secret lake at all.
Yeah, Joe Brooks was here 50 years ago. Sorry.
Filming it on television for a giant event. But
for ABC.
yeah, he's an incredible person. One of the first adventure
he kind of
anglers.
had a larger than life persona, and he was a big, strong, handsome guy, and born in 1901, long time ago. He lived to be 71, and he originally was in his family's insurance business. Now you know where this is going. He said no thanks after a while, and he just basically up and quit and said, I'm going to make fly fishing my job. Now, can you imagine doing it back in the 20s or something like that? There weren't Instagrams and ways to do it. You had to sit down and write. And Joe, if he was alive today, he would tell you he was a serious drinker, and that I believe his wife's name's Mary. And it was Mary that kind of got him on track and did a lot of editing, cleaned it all up. And so they were just a great team, and she traveled with him wherever he went. But because I remember watching some of his old movies and outdoor life articles that were filmed in, like you said, Argentina and places that were really no infrastructure for a traveling angler whatsoever. But as you said, Jim, on TV shows, American Sportsman, and wrote 10 books and buried here in Livingston. And as a kid, I would have to say Joe Brooks was my guy. And I had to be careful because my grandfather was a dry fly purist in Missoula. And so he fished these early days. And the Jefferson was an amazing trout stream when he was here. And it's okay now. It's just not like it used to be. But the Big Blackfoot, the Clark Fork, Bitterroot, and then some of the other rivers closer to here. But when Joe Brooks started writing articles in Outdoor Life, he would mention these rivers and do a big spread. I looked at him in elementary school and junior high, and I'd sit in the library and look at fishing magazines. And my grandfather hated Joe Brooks because he was calling them blue ribbon trout streams,
Yeah.
I don't think he got as specific as maybe the Beaverhead, but Madison, Bitterroot, Clark Fork,
Yellowstone.
yeah. And so my granddad just would get beat red and mad when he heard the name Joe Brooks.
Well, Joe also, was such a pioneer when it came to travel and introducing new destinations. He really brought exotic travel and adventurous fly fishing to audiences that had never seen it before, never even thought about it before. I mean, the pioneering work he did in Patagonia, places like Africa, Cuba, ran with, Stu and Lefty and all those guys back in the early days of pioneering a lot of these places. Quite the guy, Joe Brooks, and huge, huge icon in the sport of fly fishing. Next up, number 16 on the list, Brian, you know this name. Not a lot of people do. Prince Helfrich. Unless you are involved in kind of the whitewater community in Idaho, you might not have ever heard this name before. But this guy was a legendary river guide and outfitter, and one of the first to navigate and guide anglers throughout Oregon, Idaho, a lot of the wild rivers, including the Rogue, the McKenzie, and most especially the Middle Fork of the Salmon, where he is an absolute legend down there.
Yeah, didn't they create the McKenzie drift boat?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Prince and the Helfriches.
Yep.
I mean, they're still one of the only crews that are rowing wooden drift boats down the Rogue River right now.
Today they're still doing
and the
it.
Middle Fork of the Salmon.
Yeah.
I mean, I was with them, and one of their guides, I think he was 72 or 80 at the time, and he made sure that he took the most technical route the entire time and make fun of the 30 and 40-year-old kids for taking the easy route.
Yeah, he was the first to really kind of combine fly fishing with whitewater rafting, ran a ton of first descents on several major rivers in the Pacific Northwest and beyond, and really opened up new fisheries for trout and steelhead anglers on rivers that people really didn't think you could access before. But yeah, Prince was quite the guy, and inspired generations of guides, outfitters, and conservationists really to protect and appreciate a lot of these wild rivers throughout the West.
Yeah, it's a great family story, too. Fourth generation guides now, men and women from the Helfrich family. I drive by the Helfrich boat ramp constantly on the McKenzie, and they're still living there 100 years after Prince. They still have one of the best outfitting businesses in the United States, especially on the Middle Fork, and then their staples with Rogue, McKenzie, and even the John Day. And I've done a Middle Fork trip with I guess it'd be his grandson. It was Ken Helfrich. And Ken's about my age, and, they're all just consummate rowers of technique, not real herky-jerky, very smooth. It'd be like kind of cruising on corduroy snow on GS skis. It's just big, wide turns, no fear, no going in sideways, no hitting rocks. But they also sort of started the extra nice stuff, the nice lunches on the McKenzie instead of just a wet sandwich in a bag. And then, of course, on the Middle Fork, having lobster and really fantastic food on their trips, and keeping guides that would work for them for 20, 30 years, and just a great crew. So big name in my neck of the woods when I was an Oregonian, and in the rowing community, and pioneering the first drift boat designs and construction. So pretty neat stuff.
Yeah, and a great family, still going strong today in the industry. Mm-hmm. Next up, number 17, a good buddy of yours, Brian O'Keefe, Randall Kaufman, renowned fly fishing author, wrote influential books like Bone Fishing was one of his. He wrote Fly Tying for Beginners. He was also an industry leader and a fly shop owner and partner in Kaufman's Streamborn, which was a highly respected fly shop for decades that served as a key resource for anglers, seeking great gear, flies, education, but also destinations. He was an early pioneer in a lot of the fly fishing travel business.
He's probably one of the only guys that actually has like a legitimate fly that he designed, and as far as like the modern day kind of goes, he's kind of the forefront of that. I mean, that thing is still sold.
What,
I think the
Kaufman
Stone,
Yeah.
the stimulator. I mean, those are staples that, he's got to be making some good royalties.
Still catching tons of fish today. I mean, those are staples in anybody's fly box.
He's probably got the Umpqua phone number memorized by now. But, he wandered out here in Ketchum and Jackson, and back when Jack Dennis was just a whippersnapper, and Renee was, long hair and beard, a big bear claw on his chest, and the Kaufman guys and Dennis Black, who started Umpqua Feather Merchants in Glide, Oregon, way back in the day, they would just roam around, the original trout bums, selling flies, having a really good time.
They always had a good time.
Oh, yeah. And, when they started Kaufman Streamboard, it was a very successful business because they were pretty early on with the
direct mail order.
Mail order catalogs and stuff.
Catalog used to be the size of the phone book. I mean, it was massive
like
every year.
And at one time when I was a rep, I knew that for scientific anglers, they were the largest dealer in the country. And almost every line I had, they were the largest retailer in the country. And then that formula kind of went to West Bank Angler and down to Marriott's in L.A. And actually one of the things Randall didn't embrace early enough was a website with, online sales and stuff. He was a little behind on that, but he was definitely not behind on early fly fishing travel. And, some of the people that came from the stores, because they eventually had one in Bellevue, Washington, one in downtown Seattle. But Mark Bale, at one time president of Sage for quite a long time. George Cook, legendary angler and rep.
John Hazel. I mean, it's a who's who of who worked at Kaufman's.
Jamie Lyle, and then just on and on. Just an amazing crew.
Spawned a lot of people in this industry today.
Yeah. He had those first big long range trips. I think that's what they called, weren't they? Long range trips.
I don't think he did too many of those.
I think it's Steve Abel.
But I mean, he was early on at Christmas Island.
That's right. He's at Canton.
Canton
in the 80s.
So many of these places. Yeah. And back in the day, before Kaufman's as a business went away, I mean, they were at the forefront of retail, of catalog sales, and certainly travel. I mean, they pioneered some amazing places around the world, and they were the big deal back in the day, for sure. And where is Randall these days?
He splits up his year between Tigard, Oregon, and Jackson or Moose, Wyoming, and lives with Mary, and they backpack in the Sierras, do a ton of fun stuff. They're just really good people having a good life.
Well, that's good to hear. And he contributed a lot to the sport. There's no doubt about it. Well, number 18 on the list, another guy we all know well and absolutely love, Mike Lawson. You said earlier, along with Jack Dennis and Gary LaFontaine, made up the traveling fly fisherman trio that did so much to promote the sport back in the day. Founder of Henry's Fork Anglers, which he opened in 1976, one of the most respected fly shops, and even today, guide services anywhere in the West. As an author, an incredible fly tyer, great designer, and has been a huge conservation advocate for decades for the Henry's Fork and the waters of the Yellowstone region.
Yeah, I'm lucky enough to know Mike, and he's been super supportive of me over the years. And I think he was the first signature tire for Umpqua with the no hackle.
I think he might have been.
Yep.
Certainly in the first three.
Oh, man, he had the most stacked rock guide roster probably in history in the Rocky Mountains. I mean, some of them are still guiding for him today. Bob Lamb's been guiding, 51 years now?
Yeah.
And Mike's a staple. We learned a lot from Mike.
Yeah. Have you ever just sort of hung out with Mike and just...
Many times.
Yeah. You just get him going on something, and those stories come out about losing drift boat trailers or when he and Jack Dennis flipped the boat, and he's got a million stories, and they're hilarious. He's really got a good sense of humor. And it really, when it comes down to nicest guys in the business, he would be right up there. And I fortunately live 20 minutes from him, so we get together for lunch. Well, not enough, but 3 or 4 times a year. And I just can sit there. And if we're in a little burger joint in St. Anthony, everyone that walks in, hey, Mike, how you doing? Well, I fell off my ladder and I broke my shoulder. And then, 20 minutes later, it gets back to the story, but didn't skip a beat. He's doing great. And just love him. Shirley and he, like you said, started that business in 1976, and they were tying flies like crazy and just trying to make ends meet. And then one thing that really helped back in those days, he was really early on with the hosted trip. He would get some of his better customers together, go to New Zealand a lot. And so,
Belize.
Yeah. And just, they just worked and made it happen. And like you say, the stacked guide roster, and it was one of the fly shops in the country.
Yeah. I mean, it still is.
Yeah.
I was fortunate I fished with, Sean, his son. It's been nice to, you hear all the stories that aren't in the books, and you get to know Mike a little bit differently than that. And I have a lot of respect for Mike.
Oh, I think everybody does. And what he's done for Western fly fishing,
amazing.
Few can touch it.
Oh, yeah. No original board member of the Henry's Fork Foundation, and on and on and on. And he'll get very adamant about conversation. He doesn't just sign a computerized
letter
letter
of
to
support.
someone. He gets
Rolls up his sleeves.
He gets going, and it gets him going.
Absolutely. Quite a guy, no doubt. Mike Lawson, number 18. Number 19 on the list, Dave Whitlock, sadly passed away in 2023. Fly designer, conservationist, amazing artist, a great author. He was a special individual. And, Dave was with us for a lot of years. And I think even people who recently came to the industry, a lot of them had the pleasure of getting to know Dave. And he was quite an individual.
Yeah, he was always at the shows.
Yep.
Little booth, artwork. I mean, invented the Zappa Gap for all you tires out there.
He was a chemist.
Yep. Yeah. He worked for Phillips. For Phillips.
Yeah, he was an oil chemist. And then, like a good angler, he quit. And he quit corporate America. And he basically just said, I'm going to make a living at art and casting, instruction, and writing. And, married Emily, which was a fantastic, 2-person combo, and he did it. Yeah,
and along the way, created a few fly patterns that people have probably heard of. The Whitlock hopper. It's called a trouter too in its time.
Old Dave's hopper.
Yeah, Dave's hopper. The red fox squirrel nymph. Remember the near enough crayfish? That was
I
one
still
of his.
fish it.
Oh, the near enough sculpin is still a good
near enough
fly.
sculpin. Yeah,
That's right.
And I think as far as bass flies go, his diving frog not only is a work of art, and Umpqua does it, and it's beautiful. That thing catches fish like crazy.
And knotless leader connection. That's right, created Zappa Gap.
Yep.
For those of us who still glue their leaders in for their dry fly rods.
You're such a Renaissance man.
Yeah. So that was number 19, Dave Whitlock, just an absolute gentleman as well. Quite a guy. Number 20 on the list, the inventor of the elk-haired caddis. Think about that. Probably one of the most famous flies in the history of the sport. We're talking, of course, about Al Troth, one of the most widely used dry flies in the world of all time in fly fishing, the elk-haired caddis. This is the guy that invented it, Al Troth. A pioneer of Western fly fishing, helped popularize fishing throughout the Rockies, particularly here in Montana, where he guided and tied flies for local anglers, visiting anglers. Known as a really humble guy, was kind of his reputation.
Yeah, I'm surprised people don't know more about him, especially where we live. I mean, at the shop here, we had, I think it was you have a shadow box gym of some artwork with the flies on it. And
a bunch of his original flies.
It was downstairs in the basement, and during caddis season, and all the shop kids are getting all their caddis flies and tying all their stuff. We walk by, I'm like, oh, there's Al Troth right there, and they're like, oh, that's cool, and they just keep going. I'm like, guys, hold on here. Let's take a look at your fly box. You're tying elk hair, caddises. That's maybe the guy.
Maybe a little salute to the portrait is in order here.
Yeah, and he started out like a normal, everyday guy, born in 1930, and he lived to be 82, but he was a Pittsburgh steel worker.
I did not know that.
Tough job. And he did his stint in the Navy, and he taught machine shop in high school, and then he just got the bug and moved to Dillon. And, Dillon and the Beaverhead were not a known fishery. I was fortunate to fish it in my late teens. And what wouldn't that be? It would be around 1970. And back then, I used to trout bum up along the Madison, and you could buy live sculpins in a jar. I don't really know. They must have little traps or something. And these spin fishermen, because spinning was really getting big, then line was better, the reels were out. And they put a hook through a sculpin's lips, cast it out with one split shot, and just kind of drift it down and catch a big brown every cast. And so, having grown up with my dry fly purist grandfather, I was just thinking I never catch fish that big. Because speaking of Lee Wolf, we mostly fished a gray wolf or a royal wolf and sometimes a muddler, which was kind of a streamer, but we fished it dry. So, when I started going on my own, I finally found a marabou muddler, a green marabou muddler, and it didn't sink really. So, I thought it was okay. I started to actually catch a few nice fish with that. And then I think I was in Dillon and I came across a Troth bullhead. And that was really a sculpin fly, the first one I'd ever seen in my life. And I fished it on the Beaverhead. And one day Al came rowing by me and I said something. He was really pretty grumpy with me because I had kind of hiked in and gotten some really good water. You just didn't see wade fishermen, way back on the Beaverhead. And so I only ran into him that one time, but I'll never forget. Just iconic cowboy hat, kind of rough guide-looking guy, and I bet those guys got so many fish. But pretty cool guy, fly tying guide, and Dillon, Montana guy.
Yeah, that's right. Inventor of the elk hair, number 20.
Yeah, but what year?
Did he invent the elk hair?
Yeah.
Oh, God, that's a question. I don't know. Do you know the answer to that?
1957.
Wow.
That's 68 years old. Is that right?
A year of a great Chevrolet and a great dry fly. No doubt about it. 1957.
That's a good year.
Yeah, that's a good year. That's right. Well, number 21 on our list, another guy we know from right here in our backyard, Bob Jacklin, a legendary guide and fly shop owner, founded Jacklin's Fly Shop in West Yellowstone, Montana, way back in 1970. Which was really a trusted resource for anglers who would visit the iconic waters of Yellowstone National Park. Master fly tyer, great casting instructor, and just, again, another guy who was so happy to share his knowledge with anglers of every age and every ability level.
Oh yeah, Cortland lines, St. Croix rods. I mean, fortunate enough to work in a school that we're doing the schools basically because of the work that Bob did, and Bob attends the schools, and it's always nice. He's still
going
getting
strong.
after it, casting
More
hard.
than 50
good.
years in the industry.
He ran a cool little program. His guides were anglers. If you didn't cast well, you didn't have a job. If you didn't fish on your days off, you didn't have a job. If you didn't tie flies when you got off the water, you didn't have a job. If you can't fish a lime trude on the Madison single, you didn't have a job. He hired anglers.
Yeah,
that's
generations
pretty cool.
of them.
Yeah. And I saw you guys at the Wretched Mess.
Yeah.
The West Yellowstone fly fishing event. Now that's hopefully an annual event.
Bob Jacklin's casting pond.
And the Bob Jacklin casting pond. It's beautiful.
It is awesome.
Anyone going through West should check it out. It's really fun. They had a distance casting contest, but I can't remember who won that.
It wasn't a distance casting comp. It was an all-around comp. But somebody decided to say to hell with the targets and just threw 115 feet and walked away.
116.
Brian Keefe. 116, but who's counting?
It was a big old heavy 5-weight. It's not like it was.
And the Bob Jacklin casting ponds are not small. You had to use that whole real estate. So
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah, Bob was just a great guy, super nice guy. And you know what? He just did it. He stayed and worked in West Yellowstone forever, still going strong. And, he can look back and say, man, I probably helped 10,000 people catch fish or learn how to fly fish.
Maybe a couple 100,000.
at least.
55 years in the business running the fly shop in West. Pretty amazing.
And all the conservation in the park, too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Number 22 on the list. Next up, we have another amazing saltwater icon, Mr. Billy Pate. Passed away in 2011, but during his time in the game, set multiple world records, especially for the species he loved more than anything else, which was tarpon. He helped revolutionize saltwater fly fishing, obviously for tarpon, but really kind of pushed the limits at the time of what people thought was possible with a fly rod. World record holder, multiple International Game Fish Association world records, including a legendary 188-pound tarpon. And I kind of grew up watching Billy Pate on the old Scientific Anglers VHS tapes we talked about at the beginning. He loved his tarpon. And Brian O'Keefe, you knew Billy well, traveled to some exotic places with him, and spent a fair bit of time with him.
Yeah, I just felt super lucky to, be fishing for tarpon with Billy and some other guys that were also world record holders in terminal tackle, but fish over 200 pounds. And so just a really fun trip. That was to Africa, country of Sierra Leone. And
that was in like the early 90s, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was pretty wild.
Oh, the
and crazy.
Civil War trip.
I'm sorry?
The Civil War trip.
Yes. Oh, yeah, with Liberia.
Yeah.
300,000 people being killed.
Oopsie.
Yeah, it was kind of an oopsie. But there wasn't any CNN or, anything back then. You just went and took your chances. But, consummate Southern gentleman and dedicated to, advancing tackle and techniques for tarpon, and including the Billy Pate reel. And but one thing a lot of people don't know is that he was a very early person in Argentina, and he went 25 years in a row. And then he explored some of the northern rivers in Argentina up by Salta for golden dorado. And that was a long time ago. So, we're seeing golden dorado and peacock bass and the jungle species being kind of a hip thing now. But there were people back in the day still, way ahead of everybody else. So Billy was one of those guys. But he also fished the North Umpqua, Oregon a lot for summer steelhead. So steelhead, tarpon.
His reel was super popular.
Yeah.
I mean, some new guys still have it.
Yeah,
know
partnered
about it
with
today,
Ted
but-
Jurassic,
Yeah.
who has T-board reels now, obviously.
But
to
the
Billy
anti-reverse.
Pate fly reel. Yeah, those are amazing pieces of equipment.
He had one of the first anti-reverse reels. Remember, you could hold the reel, let a fish run, and then get back on the reel and not have to let go of the handle.
Sailfish, that's a super popular one.
Did a lot of that. An opinionated guy, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, he had his theories, and
Yeah.
but as you said, those old 3M tapes of Billy, and if they played in a fly shop over and over, people could lip sync those things word for word, like tarpon will not hit a fouled fly, and it's just great stuff.
He would call the little tarpon that he hooked that were under like 80 pounds. He'd be like, "Oh, we got another rat on." Call them rats. He liked his big tarpon, no doubt about it. Well, number 22, Billy Pate. Number 23, an incredible author who did so much for the sport, Norman McLean. Obviously, brilliant guy, went to Dartmouth, so enough said right there. But we all know the book, A River Runs Through It, later adapted into a very famous film, but really kind of pioneered fly fishing literature. Deep connection to Montana's rivers, and his storytelling was often rooted kind of in his lifelong love for Montana and specifically the Blackfoot River. But Norman McLean, who is an author that everybody who fly fishes needs to know.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's seen the movie. If you haven't seen the movie and you're listening, you should go watch the movie.
Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
Yeah, young Brad Pitt.
I'll never leave Montana, brother.
Here's another guy that was born over 100 years ago, 1902. And I think he lived to be about 88. Born in Nova Scotia, okay, that probably was a good place to be a kid and grow up, but then moved to Missoula, worked for the Bitterroot National Forest at age 14, which coincidentally, my grandfather was the superintendent of the Bitterroot Lowland National Forest. And we fished on the Big Blackfoot River, my brother and I, on the lawn, casting 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock. So when I read the book, saw the movie, I thought, well, this is about us. It was almost weird. But, he went to Dartmouth, and he was editor of one of the school newspapers. And when he graduated, the person that took his position, it's a name we don't know, Theodore Giesel, whose pen name is Dr. Seuss.
Yeah, Theodore Geisel, one of the most famous Dartmouth grads of all time, Dr. Seuss. Yeah,
and Norman also had Robert Frost as a teacher, the poet, the race of men that don't fit in, a race that can't stand still, that broke their hearts of kith and kin and roamed the world at will. So really pretty neat. He got his PhD in English, and so he was a writer's writer, but he didn't write A River Runs Through It till after he retired. He was an older guy, and then he did the Smoke Jumper book, and my grandparents and my mother, who was 19, when the fire happened that killed the firefighters that the book is all about, she would recall with a twinkle in her eye about dating some of those firefighters and stuff.
Your grandfather would get up and leave the room and say, I don't want to hear it.
Right,
Yeah, well, McLean was something. His work really brought fly fishing into mainstream literature and of course, film with the Redford movie. So quite a guy at number 23. Number 24, a legendary Florida Keys guide by the name of Steve Huff, widely regarded as one of the greatest flats fishing guides of all time, pioneering techniques for catching tarpon, permit, and bonefish on the fly. He just played such a role in everything from refining technical poling skiffs to, the design of boats to, developing watercraft that could silently navigate the shallow flats in pursuit of wary game fish. I mean, you think about what Steve Huff did with boat design and contributed to that and what that means for all of us that go out and fish the flats today. He was a mentor to the best, record-setting guide, but known as a guy that had just an unbelievable work ethic to this day. At 70-some years old, still going strong, still guiding.
Seems like his son, took on that work ethic too. I've never met Steve Huff, but we all know who he is. Yep. At least by we, meaning my younger crew, is one of the few guides I've wanted to like hire and go fish with. You know, it's like I'm not really a guided angler. It's not my thing. You go on for work and that thing, but if I'm going to go fishing, I'd just go fishing on my own. But if I was like, man, if I was going to pay for a guide, I would just pay to be in Steve Huff's boat.
Yeah.
Just seems like a wealth of knowledge.
One problem.
You can't get on.
You can't.
I know. I tried.
He's got about 15 anglers that book him up for weeks and months. So he only has about 15 anglers a year, but he's on the water probably 340 days of the year. And if you've seen pictures or you've met him, Hollywood good-looking guy, fit, no belly, hard worker. And there's a lot of really world-class anglers who have said, not just that Steve Huff is one of the best flats guides, he's one of the best guides in the world, and it's that work ethic. He's got a degree in marine biology, so he's going to bring a lot of that science into the tides, the sun, the time of year, migrations, and he's a thinking man's angler. And I'm in your boat, but we'll never get in Steve's boat.
No, I wish.
But I'd love to spend a day with him, and that would just be, I'd just sit there, wow, this is so cool.
Listen. Yeah, just sit there and listen to him talk. No doubt.
Well, in speaking of world records, that Evans person.
From Monty Burke's book, Lords of the Fly. Tom Evans.
He and Steve set, I think, 6 tarpon world records in 4 line class.
Yeah.
And I think he guided 15 anglers to first place finishes in those big Gold Cup type tarpon and bonefish tournaments in the Keys. So, man.
Yeah, he's been there, done that.
Yeah, that's a resume.
And still going strong.
Yep.
Yeah, amazing. Well, next up on the list, number 25, Sylvester Neames played a key role in reintroducing and popularizing soft hackles. We talked about the early Lyson ring soft hackle contributions, but author of numerous books, did a lot about soft hackled flies, and also an advocate for simplicity in fly design, which is pretty cool. And Bryan Gregson, I know you're a big fan of Sylvester Neames, as your good friend Yvonne Chenard, who loves him.
Yeah, Sylvester, diving into working with Yvonne Chenard and Craig Matthews and Marl's book, and the last book is coming out, and it's you kind of learning where each person got their kind of ideas and their tactics from, and being with Yvonne a lot, and fortunate to. A lot of his techniques where he's at now in the last 10 to 20 years have come from Lyson and Sylvester Neames. And so it's been interesting learning like how he learned about them and what he's using and his tactics.
Yeah. He's another one of our anglers. He came from England and lived to be 88. And he did real work, like a lot of people, like got educated, got a real job, worked in a tall building in Chicago and Detroit. After a while, and having vacation in Yellowstone Park with his wife, they up and moved to
Bozeman,
Montana. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
And he in a way kind of reminds me a little bit of Jim Teeney. So here are 2 subsurface fishermen. Sylvester rarely fished a dry fly, and he pretty much advocated the soft tackle on the banks of the Madison. Would give random strangers 2 or 3 just to get them on the team. Like try this, do this. And do you guys remember
converts?
Remember Bill Black?
Oh yeah,
Dennis Black's brother.
Yeah, Spirit River.
Yeah, and so Dennis and Sylvester ran into each other on one of the rivers out here, and Sylvester said to Bill, "Hey, I'll make you a bet of like $10 that I can catch a fish in this run in less than 10 casts," and he didn't, and he got all kind of pissed off, But he was into the soft tackle, and you just got to love it. He's a super nice guy, just a gentleman, and just wanted people to catch fish.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're getting close to our top 30. We're on number 26 right now, and again, not a top 30, just 30 names that we think are influential. We could easily do 100 plus, but at number 26 on the list, just one of the most incredible people I've ever met in the industry. Renee Harrop. We talked about Mike Lawson, and a line I've always liked, that if Mike was the mayor of the Henry's Fork, then Renee Harrop is the high priest. without question. Master of dry fly fishing and an incredible fly tire. And an absolute Henry's Fork legend. And Bryan Gregson, somebody you have known well for a good chunk of your life.
Yeah, Renee's an incredible fly tire, an incredible angler. On one of my first trips leaving the country to go photograph for fly fishing, we're sitting on the bank of the river, and I was like, hey, I'm a little nervous. I'm going on my first bone fishing trip, give me some tips. And he just kind of looked at me and was like, I've never been bone fishing. And I'm like, oh, well, why not? And he goes, Bryan, I've been fishing this river for like 52 years. I'm barely scratching the surface of it. Why would I leave? And I'm like, oh, man, if you're barely scratching the surface of this place, then we are screwed.
Yeah. He's a real thinking man, angler, real deep thinker. And that's sometimes hard to get to know from just seeing someone at a sport show and that sort of thing. But he can put words out that talk about the soul of fly fishing as good as anybody I've ever met in my whole life. And he began fishing the Henry's Fork at age 9.
I know,
unbelievable. And because of his his expertise on light leader presentation fishing, he's probably as popular in Japan and Europe as he is here. So he has a real international crowd. But being in the Island Park area for so long, the Andre Pouillons and all these original trout bums in their vans, that's a family of anglers that, holy cow, in their prime, if it was an Olympic sport, they would be gold medal anglers, just as good as it gets. But, he and Bonnie, when they started out, they were just cranking out flies to sell at gas stations, right. And then Will,
there's Stalk Up.
No. The first fly shop in Island Park.
He was an auctioneer. Will Godfrey.
Oh,
Will
Godfrey.
Godfrey.
Yes.
And so when Will came along, there was more places to sell flies, but Orvis would take every fly they could tie, and were a big chunk of their business. And, if you can get, and you still can, there's a few local fly shops that sell original House of Harrop flies. Would you really fish one? They're just...
I've got a bunch framed in shadow boxes. I know that. I'm not going to process that.
I might know somebody who gets an order every year and just puts them away in his closet.
They're like gold bars.
There's just not too many people I feel fortunate to be on that list.
My claim to fame with Rene Harrop is I watched the Super Bowl with him 2 years ago, and in the Star Bar in St. Anthony, and what a great time, he's just another guy, comes in jeans, and he's just a normal guy.
Yeah, he's
brilliant.
And he's like a shaman, too, when it comes to Henry's Fork.
Oh,
There's
boy.
no doubt about it.
He's got magic.
Well, next up on the list, number 27, Gary Borger, one of the nicest guys in fly fishing, really a pioneering educator, wrote a ton of books, including Presentation, another book called Nymphing, Innovator in Fly Design, and really kind of an overall advocate for versatile fishing techniques. Just did a lot of everything. Still going strong. Just ran into him at the Denver Fly Fishing Show a couple weeks ago. Still getting out there. And again, just one of the nicest guys in the industry who has spent decades contributing to the sport.
Oh, yeah. Teaching everybody how to cast and all those essay videos that, are on VHS. Scientific Anglers recently put a bunch of them on YouTube.
Oh, that's good.
And,
that's good to
which
know.
is good. And so a lot of them he's fishing over here in the Spring Creeks over here, and we're at the shop, and the Rio sells this an indicator called the Kahuna. And so we're teaching some of the young shop kids about this thing. And have you seen this? I have no idea. Is this brand new? And it's like, no, it's been around, this idea for like 40 years. And so you could pull up the old YouTube thing and they watch it. And the cool thing is they all took that idea and went and fished it. So if we sell it, then you should learn how to go fish it too. And now the Kahuna is like a little underground thing here.
Oh, cool. Like the banjo?
Banjo's way more underground.
Yeah. But, Gary, like you said, Jim, he's just one of the nice guys, and it's just super pleasant, never real controversial or, doesn't have any attitude. He's just a nice guy who gives a lot back to the sport. Like almost everybody we've had on this list have given more to the sport than they've taken out.
Oh, by far.
And, Gary was a nationally known educator, and consequently, he's just a great speaker, lecturer, and great with audiences. And And I always enjoy seeing him, even if it's just a nod in the aisle or a handshake and a little bit of chatting here and there. But Gary's a good man and has just been unselfish about what he's contributed to fly fishing.
Absolutely. Well, down to our final three here, boys. Number 28 on the list, Bob Klauser. Also, one of those flies you might have heard about called the Klauser minnow, used worldwide in both freshwater and saltwater. He's also a pioneer of fly fishing for smallmouth bass. He owned and operated Klauser's Fly Shop in Middletown, Pennsylvania for years. And was really kind of the dean of the Susquehanna River, did so much for smallie fishing. And again, one of these guys who's just a great ambassador for fly fishing through books, DVDs, and countless public appearances. Klauser's still going strong, just an absolute gentleman and the kind of guy you referenced it a couple of times, Brian O'Keefe, when you get a chance to sit down with Bob, you just sit and listen. Because he's just such a fascinating guy.
And if you see him, you won't get a handshake, you'll get a hug. He's just one of those, gentle giant kind of guys. And one thing, Bob's done a lot of different things from casting, instructing, writing, and his famous Klauser minnow. In fact, I tried to use Klauser in Scrabble. So I put it out there on the board.
I would have given that to you.
And, I would have too.
And it did, the official Scrabble dictionary rejected it. So I sent him an email, said, Bob, you're not a noun yet. But anyway, just a super good guy. And what I think is neat is that he managed to do all he did and teach people how to fly fish when there was no trout streams around where they lived. It was smallmouth bass and other warm water species. So he found his niche. He did really well and universally and generally liked by everybody.
Yeah, total innovator.
I bet his fly probably catches more species with one pattern than any other pattern out there.
I think he said Lefty kept track, and it was in the 80s of species, because what other fly is as good in fresh and as it is in salt? It's a minnow, and everything eats a minnow.
Everything. Well, number 28 on the list, our good buddy Bob Klauser. Number 29, I got to tell you, one of my favorite people in the industry who I think has just done so much for the sport and also for our area right here in Montana is Mr. Craig Matthews. This is a guy who is deeply connected to the Yellowstone region's wild waters, and few know Yellowstone National Park's trout waters as intimately as Craig. He was the founder of a very famous fly shop, an operation that opened in the 1980s in West Yellowstone called Blue Ribbon Flies, which for decades was a hub for fly fishing knowledge, gear, guiding, and conversation. He has done so much to help anglers really learn and navigate the waters of Yellowstone Park, pioneered fly patterns, and BRYAN GREGSON, I'll have you talk about this. Talk about a tireless advocate for conservation and wild trout.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah.
We have $3 Bridge because of him.
That's right.
If you like fishing $3 Bridge on the Madison, you can thank Craig. Yeah. I was fishing with Craig 2 days ago on the Madison for the mid-chatches, and it's something we do kind of in this time of year. And it's another kind of guy that I like fishing with Craig because we literally sit and fish, and he just tells stories, and it's amazing. Yeah. Craig is an amazing person and really good fly tire.
Oh, yeah. Is there many people more pleasant than Craig?
No.
Right.
Are there many more people that are as pleasant that were the chief of police in a town?
For West Yellowstone, back in the day, that's what got him to West Yellowstone. A job with the police department, became the chief of police before becoming, a full-time fly shop owner. But his stories that he has from those early days of West Yellowstone and, as we said, from bikers to brothels to everything else, he is full of great stories and still absolutely one of the nicest people, great ambassador for the sport, and has done so much for the region and for conservation.
1% for the planet?
Yeah, 1% for the planet. A lot of Belize fishing. One of the few guys I know that fishes a sea urchin pattern for permit.
Yeah.
It's a very slow retrieve.
And as a tackle rep, you really get to see different sides of people, the business side, the grinning retailer side. And so I would set up a little showroom in West Yellowstone with all my products on racks and shelves. And then we'd leave the store and go in there and go through the showroom. And I just always looked forward to he and Jackie coming to my showroom and spending a few hours. We'd tell some stories. We'd look at product, and they were just so nice. They wouldn't beat me up for another 10% or tell me about what thing leaked or broke, and they're just the best, you know. And so, but fortunately, going strong, and just again another Hollywood handsome guy and fly fishing that's a super nice person.
He was here at the Yellow Dog Fly Shop a few weeks back doing a presentation, which we do throughout the winter months, usually once a week. We bring in a featured speaker, and he just filled the place up. I mean, there's so many people that love Craig, that follow Craig, and that when he says, hey, let me tell you a thing or two about fishing in Yellowstone, everyone just gets really quiet and says, okay, like I'm just listening, because when he talks, you pay attention.
Yeah.
And then let me just ask you guys, what fly in the last 15 years you think was the consummate blue ribbon fly?
Serendipity.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh, my God. That's when I first came to Montana 30-some years ago. The Serendipity was the hot fly. And, it just crushed.
Yeah, and you can't find it in a fly shop hardly anymore. It's been tweaked and changed, the RS2 emergers and all kinds of things. But, that was a hot fly. It was so simple, too.
Yeah, Zelon, ribbed body, and a little bit of antelope, tough to antelope hair, and that was it.
Well, shit, he brought Ceylon to the market for DuPont.
Yeah, they were getting rid of it, and he bought up everything they had. He bought a whole pallet of it and had Zelon for 30 years.
He still has it at the house.
Such a good story. Well, Craig Matthews, number 29, and that brings us, gentlemen, to our final person on this list of 30 incredible innovators, pioneers, and legends of the sport. Number 30, the legendary Zane Grey. And for all the young anglers out there, this is not just the name of a hardy rod model. There was actually a Zane Grey. He was a pioneering big game angler, one of the first anglers to pursue large saltwater species like marlin, tuna, and even swordfish with heavy tackle, set multiple world records. Also the author of Fishing Classics. So many books, and just a great writer, a world record holder, and a great explorer in his day. Went off to some, off the grid remote places that no one even thought about fishing before. There was Zane Grey right at the forefront of it.
Didn't he have the first descent of the Rogue River in the wooden boat?
No.
What am I thinking?
I
Because
think
the boat is there.
Selfridge was, but he
was with Zane.
He was one of the first guys to fish it from a drift boat.
Okay.
And
it was early Oregon.
He still his Zane Grey cabin is still on the banks of the Rogue. It's about
the Rogue.
I mean, I'm sorry, the Rogue.
The Umpqua?
Yeah.
Or the Rogue.
No,
it's on the Rogue.
He fished the Umpqua quite a bit, but he was more famous on the Rogue, and his old cabin down there is as big as this room, but it's pretty darn cool.
I think when I was with the Helbridges on the Rogue, that's why this rings a bell there. There was something about they either blew up the rock or something to get through.
Yeah, they dynamited Blossom Bar.
Yeah, that's right.
But we will have someone email in and correct us on that one.
Please, if you're out there, send us a note.
And we'll make everybody sound better than they really are.
But Zane Grey was an absolute legend, no doubt about it.
And when was he born? 1872.
Yep.
This is just ancient. Now, he was famous for his traveling. Tahiti, caught the first 1,000-pound marlin ever. On what kind of line? On what kind of rod? What kind of reel? How did he get there? There were trains in the world. There were
take a steamship?
ships and stuff.
Old, slow steamships.
Yeah, I mean, he would go down to the Bay of Islands in New Zealand and just go crazy bill fishing down there. And he liked, he was a fly fisherman through and through, even though he was a more famous author. He was one of the first millionaire authors in the country.
Prolific writer.
And he had a very kind of rough and tumble younger life. And just started, writing like crazy and getting rejected left and right. And if you ever just have time to kill, learn a little bit about Zane Grey. He's a pretty fascinating guy. And another kind of Lee Wolf person just gets an idea and goes and does it, and no, it doesn't matter if there's crocodiles or any kinds of, leeches or whatever. But Zane Grey was a tough guy, traveled the world when traveling was just almost impossible. And he lived for fishing, even though as a writer, these were novels on cowboys and stuff, the famous Western novels. But he did great. He fished his brains out. And you can still see some of the history of his travels around here.
Well, unbelievable. That is quite a list we put together there, guys.
That was awesome.
30 names. Definitely, again, not the top 30 or the most important 30, but 30 just impactful, influential anglers that have done so much for our sport. And there were so many other names that we could have included. We might have to do this again for a round 2. I will tell any listeners who are outraged by people we forgot, send an email into info@yellowdogflyfishing.com. Let us know what names you think should be on the next 30 if we do this again. But, so many. Nick Lyons, Dan Bailey, the Ray Jeff brothers, Chico Fernandez, Bud Lilly, Dave Hughes. I mean, you could go down, Yvonne Chenard, Steve Abel. There's so many people that have done so much for the sport that we could actually do a couple more versions of this and just keep it going. And hopefully anyone that's listened to this episode has learned a little bit about some of these people that we can thank for making fly fishing what it is today. I think that's really important.
Yeah, a lot of the books we talked about are still available. They might be out of print, but they're going to be on these websites for used books. They're going to be in your library and things like that. And may I just have 30 seconds to give you a couple John Gierak quotes?
Sure, absolutely.
One of my very, very favorite, these all came out of his books, but one of them is, "Creeps and idiots cannot conceal themselves for long on a fishing trip."
So true.
And the solution to any problem, work, love, money, whatever, is to go fishing. And the worse the problem, the longer the trip should be. They're all just brilliant. I've got a bunch, but one more. Really, the only thing a psychiatrist can do that a good fishing guide can't is write prescriptions.
He was one of a kind. John was, and I'm so glad we included him on this list because he did so much for, especially modern fly fishing and some of the younger anglers that may not be familiar with every name that we went over today, but pretty much everyone certainly knows Gierak. But again, check out some of the work and the contributions of the names that we just shared with you. I will tell you, this is in 70-some episodes of Waypoints. It's by far the longest episode we've ever recorded, but I'm okay with that for good reason.
Oh, it could have gone a lot longer.
Yeah, and we'll have to do this again for sure. But Bryan Gregson, Brian O'Keefe, thank you guys so much for your contributions to this list and this conversation, and for sitting down today and sharing so much great information with our listeners. This has been fun.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Thanks for putting it together.
Always fun to being with you guys.
Yeah, well, we'll do it again for sure. And that is it for this episode of Waypoints. Be sure to visit yellowdogflyfishing.com to plan and research trips, source gear, equipment, and flies for your next destination, and stay up to date and dialed in on the latest news in fly fishing, travel, and adventure. Join us for our next episode, and remember, keep fishing and keep traveling, because when it's all said and done, no one ever regretted a life of adventure.
This has been another episode of Waypoints, the podcast of fly fishing travel and adventure angling. Waypoints is produced by Bryan Gregson and written by Jim Klug. Music is written and provided by bluegrass legend Woody Platt. Audio engineered by Sean McCormick. Visit yellowdogflyfishing.com for more location profiles, destination information, travel news, and the industry's best selection of flies and equipment for destination angling.